to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
Back with episode 77 of the Leo Training Podcast. And this week, my guest is founder of the Evidence-Based Fitness Academy and podiatrist, Dr. Emily Splichal. In this episode, Dr. Emily and I sit down and we discuss the biomechanics of the foot and what are some common problems that an individual may experience, whether that's pronation, excessive supination, or a neutral foot, how to correct those, and what you should be looking for, and how barefoot training can help enhance athleticism from the ground up. So without further ado, let's roll to episode 77, Barefoot Training with Dr. Emily Splichal.
I'm very excited and honored to welcome Dr. Emily Splichal, founder of the Evidence-Based Fitness Academy and Doctor of Podiatry, onto the Leo Training Podcast. Dr. Splichal, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the show.
Of course, it's an honor. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, it was a pleasure meeting you in person this past summer at the Barefoot Training Seminar, Level 2. Learned a ton from you. So I know we have an incredible amount to share this evening with the audience and stuff. We're going to cover some great topics. But before we get into that, why don't you take a couple minutes, introduce yourself, let people know your background, where you're from, where you're located out of and working on, and what you're doing, what you're currently working on.
Sure. So I am based out of New York City. So I'm in Manhattan, and I am a clinician by day, so active podiatrist, was trained as a surgeon, even though I look at my podiatry patients much more in a functional integrative way. And that's really based on my master's in human movement and combination of fitness, biomechanics, neuromuscular control. And I build that into the way that I look at patients, as well as the way that I look at clients, programming, assessing, etc., which is really the foundation of my education company, which is called Evidence-Based Fitness Academy, or EBFA Fitness. And we have several certifications that we offer through EBFA, which are the Barefoot Training Specialist, Level 1, 2, and 3, Barefoot RX, which is our rehab specialist, Level 1 and 2. And then we have a Bare Workout, which is a barefoot balance training, body weight, body tension workout, which is a highly effective way to tap into the nervous system. And that's really my passion, whether I'm treating patients, educating professionals, or teaching a class at Crunch Fitness or 24-Hour Fitness, is teaching people how to enhance their movement, enhance their posture, activate their muscles through their feet and through barefoot science. And that's eventually led to the evolution of a new product that I've just developed, which is called Naboso Technology. And under that company, we have a Naboso barefoot training mat and Naboso barefoot insoles, where the insoles are coming out in the next month or two. The whole premise of that company and that product line is bringing what's called small nerve proprioceptive stimulation to otherwise slower neuromuscular environments, such as shoes or different training surfaces, etc. So pretty much I'm just obsessed with the feet.
Yeah, but this is really, really important because, in today's society, we spend so much time sedentary, so much time sitting, and our feet are really just, completely covered. They're not getting any sort of sensory feedback, any sort of stimulation. So before we even talk about the biomechanics and anatomy, let's kind of just talk about how that sort of environment that we live in, like, let's set the stage. How is that affecting us as human beings?
Yeah, so the impact is profound. However, it's in a micro way, which it's hard for us to perceive, especially some of our patients or clients, maybe some of ourselves, where we have less of a interoceptive awareness of our body, that we don't sense subtle changes in the nervous system, yet they're happening. And a lot of that micro delay in our nervous system, I believe, comes from shoes. Yes, it comes from more sitting and sedentary lifestyles and just the way that society is changing, but particularly from an evolution perspective, with the foot being a huge part of evolutionary changes, and then bipedalism. And that's how I've dedicated my career and my education, is to study the evolution of the foot and what makes the human foot so powerful in the plantigrade foot that we know and appreciate in all of our clients and in ourselves, but really how that foot has enabled human locomotion. And it was the shift towards bipedalism that really allowed the progression of, humanity and humans that we know today. So the foot being kind of critical to human locomotion means that the foot is critical to the neuromuscular control of posture and gait. And the foot is really referencing the skin in the bottom of the foot, because that's really the only contact point between the body and the ground, is the skin on the foot. And the skin on the foot is similar to the hand, but it's actually much more different than people realize. People like to make a lot of analogies between the foot and the hand, which is great. There are a lot of similarities, but the foot evolutionarily is very unique and very powerful in how sensitive it is to every micro adjustment with every step that we take. When we wear shoes, you actually block that sensory information from coming in, which means you block the nervous system's ability to micro adjust with every step that we take, which leads to micro injury, accumulation of uncontrolled stress, compensation. And then that's where you start to see really everything that comes into my office is a result of this. Right. So we are becoming a much more slower neuromuscular structure with the evolution of footwear and inactivity, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so we have quite a lot of work to do to kind of get back to a good place where we're one, a lot healthier and not having all these traumas and injuries, and hopefully you're in a good way, you're seeing less people because they're taking care of their feet.
Well, I mean, really where a lot of that has to come, it has to do with children or pediatrics, kind of how soon are we putting shoes on children, and how are we shaping our preschools or, elementary schools, and how much barefoot stimulation are they getting from newborn to really those younger years, where when you think about the peak time to really shape your nervous system, it's around age 4. So between 0 and 4 is when I tell people they need maximum barefoot stimulation, because this is the peak shaping of your nervous system. And that's really around the same time that a child learns to have a mature, kind of quote unquote mature gait, where you have a proper heel toe reciprocal arm swing gait, is around the age 3 or 4. So that has to be shaped or paralleled with barefoot stimulation, because the barefoot stimulation controls a lot of that gait.
Wow. So we should definitely be encouraging our kids to do more without their shoes on as they're going from being an infant to a toddler to the first couple of years of their life.
Absolutely. Any child that is less than, like you're 1 year old, 1 to 2 years old, there's no point in having shoes. Like some of it's like a fashion. I don't know what these parents are doing, but I would honestly get them out of those shoes. And if you do put shoes on, which I understand, like there's germs and, all that stuff. But one, if you do introduce them to germs, you technically make their immune system stronger. So that's a whole nother topic. But the shoes should be very flexible with no support in them. When you start getting age 3, 4, 5, then that's different, because then you actually need a little bit more of the support. And I'll put children around that age, if they have a very uncontrolled foot, into orthotics. And I'm a strong believer in orthotics around that age if they need them. But before that, they should not be in supportive shoes.
Wow. Very interesting. I don't know what it's called, but I remember my parents used it on, I think, myself and then my sisters, but it was like a pair of shoes that had like a bar attached to it.
Yeah. Dennis Brown bar.
Yeah. So you just kind of jogged my memory when you were talking about the 0 to 4 years old. So what was the idea behind using that? And
yeah, did that traumatize you?
I mean, it probably could.
You
have.
Probably don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember. But what was the idea behind using something like that? And is it effective at all?
Yeah, no, it is. So it's used for children who have internal tibial torsion.
Okay.
And to different degrees. So the shoes that are on there are straight last. So if a child also has metatarsal adductus or other congenital malformations skeletally, it can help to correct and guide some of those structures. And then if there is an internal tibial torsion, it derotates the tibia. However, sometimes some of that derotation is going to be happening at the knee joint, meaning you might actually just be creating a tibial femoral external rotation, or you might just be creating some hip external rotation. So there's always pluses and minuses, or positives and negatives with every intervention. So yeah, I mean, and it's still used. We did it a lot when I was in school. We have a very large pediatric program where I went to podiatry school. So we actually used a lot of those Dennis Brown bars, which I thought was like an archaic thing, but it's still used.
Interesting. Yeah, that was that piqued my curiosity there. For some reason that lit up the memory banks.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's kind of shift into our first topic that we had down here, and let's talk about the foot, the biomechanics of the foot. So, going through your course, I didn't know until I took it, the foot moves through triplanar motion. And I was like, what? What is going on here? So the foot is moving through all 3 planes of motion at once. And it's like the only, body area that does that, maybe except for our head. So why is that important to note? And, how does that affect everything else up the kinetic chain?
Yeah. So the triplanar motion, and it's hard to explain it without really showing a foot and showing that movement. Sure. However, I'll try to do it for listeners to then translate it to different sports or different activities that they might be doing, or athletes and things like that. So the part of the foot that does triplanar motion is what people will refer to as the pronation and supination. So pronation and supination of the foot is triplanar motion. Triplanar motion is you're moving through all 3 planes at the exact same time. However, the biggest thing to emphasize with this is that it takes at least 2 joints to pronate and supinate. So the most common way to understand this, especially initially, is that it's your rear foot, which means it's the ankle, and then directly below your ankle, you have your subtalar joint. So it's those two joints together that pronate and supinate. When we do a squat, so if anyone is listening and they're standing there and you go down into a squat, you technically are pronating your foot, which means you're pronating your rear foot to get into that squat. Pronation makes your foot unstable. It's almost like unlocking your foot. And I would say that's the biggest way to think of it, is pronation equals unlocking the foot. As soon as you unlock your foot, you allow energy to enter the body. When you supinate, so for those who are listening, if you go up onto your toes, like you're about to jump, or you do a calf raise, or you wear high heels, like that motion, what you're doing is you're supinating your rear foot, which means you are locking your foot, which makes it stable, and you are technically releasing energy. So when we walk or when we jump, in order to bring in energy, you have to pronate. In order to release energy, you have to supinate. And we go back and forth between these two motions within milliseconds with every step that we take. Or if we're sprinting, you're doing this clearly very fast. And that is a necessary component to dynamic movement. And our foot, the human foot, is very unique in the sense that it's able to do that. Primates' feet do not pronate and supinate the same way that our feet do, which is why they do not walk as fast as us. They cannot run as fast as us. They are not able to bear their body weight in a single leg stance. So there's a lot of different kind of evolutionary benefits to that. Where we start to see different foot types, because I know people, there's even podiatrists who throw these terms around improperly, where they'll just say everybody's overpronating, everybody needs orthotics, where you want to have a little bit of pronation in your foot. And if I see a patient or I see an athlete who has a little bit of pronation in their foot, I don't even get excited. I just teach them how they need to activate their feet before they do some sort of sport or activity or whatever. Versus if you throw every foot into an orthotic, like a stiff orthotic, you block the ability of the foot to fully unlock and lock, which means you can start to compromise the way that energy is transferred, which means you can begin to compromise the amount of power that is generated from the ground up with the feet.
Right. And then so at that point, that's when you're seeing that carry over into simple as, just human gait walking, or into sports, pretty much every sport except for maybe swimming, we're connected, the foot's connected to the ground. So there's some sort of transfer of energy going into the ground, coming back up through the body to help propel us into to dynamic movement.
All right, but technically you could say that swimming, when they're pushing against the wall to switch directions, they are taught to push all the way through their foot. So they're not going to push and then maybe pull their legs in a little bit earlier,
Right.
whatever. Like they actually they push against the wall to accelerate better than people do vertical jumps, because they're kind of pushing against resistance, and that resistance forces them to follow through with their push off against the wall. Where I see a lot of people doing vertical jump, and half the people will jump from the ground up, which are usually people who have a background in dance or gymnastics or martial arts, or they've just been taught to be connected with their feet. Mm-hmm. When I watch someone who's maybe played basketball or been cleated in a lot of sports or doesn't have an athletic background, they jump very much from their hips, like hip extension driven, versus obviously extending through your hip, but really using the torque of your ankle to plant or flex, and that's what's driving your jump.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but I have that visual in my head where you're really, one's driving more, like you said, extending through the hips, exploding up from that area of the body, versus really from the foot and pushing into the floor and driving as much force down as possible to spring.
Yeah, and it honestly is follow through. And that's what, like everyone knows, like if you're throwing a basketball, you have to follow through. If you don't follow through, you don't make the shot. Like it's part of athletics is following through. So I would want someone when they do a jump to really follow through with their entire foot, which means you get a full continuation of the energy, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, it does. Absolutely. So building upon that, this is a great kind of little segue. So let's talk about the ground reaction forces kind of involved from walking, running, and then jumping, when we land.
Okay. So when we walk, when we run, when we jump, right, there's obviously some sort of foot ground interaction. And those impact forces or ground reaction forces are really critical to the next step or to the next jump. So oftentimes in my practice or in podiatry sports medicine, we are taught that quote unquote overuse injuries are the cause of, impact forces are bad because they cause overuse injuries. But impact is critical to dynamic movement. We just need to understand how to load the impact forces. And you actually have to teach your nervous system how to anticipate the impact forces. In order to train your body to do that, you have to understand how your body even perceives impact forces. And this is the basis of a lot of my education, is getting athletes and professionals to understand that our body perceives impact as vibration. And vibration receptors are found in your feet. If you put shoes on with a lot of cushion, the cushion takes and stops the vibration, which means it's taken away your information to know how hard you're striking the ground, or to maintain your balance, or to effectively load the potential energy that lies within impact. And that's really where you start to see a lot of what's called movement inefficiency, is based on that inability to perceive impact. So I'm actually anti-cushion in shoes for that reason, especially during athletics, where when you start looking at landing techniques and different sports such as gymnastics, I was a gymnast for 13 years, so I'm just obsessed with gymnastics-based research. But when you look at, if you're fascinated in mechanics and physics and things like that, just looking at like the physics of gymnastics is fascinating. Is that gymnasts are achieving up to 14 times their body weight in impact forces. However, gymnasts that are elite, like Olympic style gymnasts, they are activating their muscles and they're actually loading the potential energy of a tumbling pass faster than a novice gymnast or someone who's less experienced. So if you understand how the body uses energy, how the body perceives energy, you can train the nervous system to load faster and to actually anticipate what's about to enter the body.
Right. And then that anticipation is going to allow you to transfer that over into better performance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the only way that a gymnast can do, a double back or something as far as a tumbling pass is they have to bring in that high of impact,
Right.
Like if you're bringing in a couple times impact, you have no energy to get high. So, impact is really important to dynamic movement, almost like parkour. Parkour, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that's like the best example of movement efficiency and the effective use of impact forces, because they're just continuously moving and doing all these crazy, but they're just flowing through it all. They never stop. They're in a continuous motion because there's a continuous transfer of energy and impact.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask you too was I wanted to get your thoughts. So obviously, you know that I'm big into rowing.
Mhm.
So when we think about the foot in whether it's on the rowing machine or in the rowing shell, I mean on the machine the person's going to be wearing a pair of shoes and then they're towed in and they just have straps over the toe area. But usually in the rowing shell they're slipping their feet into a pair of shoes and they're pretty thin. Most of the time, most people wear, a thin pair of athletic socks or barefoot. A lot of
Mhm.
rowers do. Now, obviously this isn't the ground, but that idea, that you're really trying to get across in the sport in terms of the rhythm is everybody's trying to match that push, that one
Mhm.
push during the catch and then onto the drive phase of the rowing stroke. So, just curious to get your thoughts on kind of what's happening with the foot during the rowing stroke, and anything that rowers should be thinking about or working on.
Yeah, I would say that they're keeping an active connection with the shoe and really following through in the same way. And before they row, is making sure that the foot is activated through short foot, which is kind of the foundation of what I use in every sport. But I would say making sure that it's not just a hip driven push through and that they're connecting through all of the digits while they're in the shoe and on the rower, whether it's the machine or the actual boat. Yeah.
Um, and that's a great point because again in the on the erg or in the boat you have 3 points of contact: the handle or the oar handle, the seat, and then the foot stretcher.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're always still, whether it's you're running or in rowing, you're still that point of contact where all the power phase of the sport is happening. It's happening from the feet against the foot plate. So that's a really really good point. We like to think a lot about using the legs and the posterior chain, but I haven't really ever heard anybody talk a lot about working on all of that intrinsic musculature and activating all the individual digits of the foot to making sure that you're getting everything out possible in terms of energy.
Yeah, well, because when we start looking at, and I know it's one of the topics to speak about foot to core, but when you're looking at, the power of your hips is based on the stability of your lumbopelvic hip complex, and that's really dictated by your foot contact. So similar to a cyclist in a cycling shoe and clipped in, they still need to keep their foot very active, even though they're not an impact driven sport, right? So you need to still keep the foot alive. Otherwise, you start to get a lot of subtle delayed stability in the hip. And then that's where you start to get different injuries, where I actually see a lot of labral tears in cyclists and groin strains and things like that you typically wouldn't suspect to see in a cyclist, but you actually do because of that increased instability because the foot becomes deactivated.
Right. And then it works its way all the way up the kinetic chain, and it's kind of manifesting itself in the lumbopelvic hip complex.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow. So let's talk about that a little bit more. You just mentioned foot to core. So why don't you kind of explain for those in the audience that are listening that aren't familiar what that concept is? I'm chuckling because the cat keeps opening the door right now. So yeah. They're curious. They want to listen to the conversation.
Exactly. I see. So foot to core is, and again, this goes back to gait, which is why I think it's so powerful and why I focus on it in my education of understanding the gait cycle and the evolution of locomotion helps you to understand how deeply connected the feet are with the core. So feet meaning obviously your feet, which are your base, and then your core, which is your center. So your center of gravity, your center of stability is going to be your core. Your powerhouse is your core, but your center of stability has to be in very direct communication with your base or your only contact point with the ground. And that would be that foot to core sequencing, which has a fascial integration. So there's actually fascial lines that connect that. And then there's a co-activation pattern between your feet and your core. And then there's even a biomechanical association between feet and core stability. When it comes to the fastest of those, it would be the fascial connection between the foot to core, because fascia is extremely fast, and the tension and stability of the foot to core is really what's called local stabilization. I don't want to make things too complicated, but we have two different types of stabilizers in your core, and you have local and global. Local would be deeper. So think of like smaller muscles or muscles that you can't touch, like your pelvic floor or your transverse abdominals. Your diaphragm is a local muscle, and those deeper local muscles contract isometrically to create stiffness. So if you do a brace, like an abdominal brace, that isometric contraction of the brace increases the stiffness of your abdomen. That same thing happens in your feet, is that the small muscles in the bottom of your feet are local muscles, which means they fire isometrically, just like your deep core, and they increase stiffness of your foot. So when you get stiffness in your foot, it actually co-activates the stiffness of your abdomen. And that leads to faster stability, which if you can stabilize faster, you obviously can transfer impact faster. So you become you're faster, or you become more powerful or more dynamic. So it really is a foundation to locomotion, and really every movement that we do that's closed chain with the feet really requires that foot to core stability. I will tell my patients that if your foot is strong and your core is strong, but they're not talking to each other, who cares? Like, then you might as well not have anything strong, because they have to talk to each other. It's the foundation of your nervous system. And that's truly how I look at all of my patients.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a great, the way you explained that and communicated that in terms of the global and local stabilizers, but also that the communication piece happening throughout the body. If those components are individually strong, but they're not working together as a unit, that's gonna manifest itself in poor movement.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really, when we start looking at injuries and compensation or optimal function or whatever, it really is the coordination of those connections. So kind of the timing of those connections. And, when it comes to the core, what happens with a lot of people is they're very good at getting into their transverse abdominals, but then they forget about their posterior pelvic floor, which means that they have what I call an energy leak within their entire core. Like, you need the whole thing that's coordinated together. You can't just have your obliques, but not your pelvic floor. So I focus really a lot in my programming, because you took it, on pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor really has to lead into TVA and diaphragm and psoas and obliques and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. And then again, it has the fascial connections too.
Yes.
So the two big characteristics you just said there, the coordination and timing, that's such a huge part of, not only movement in athletics and sport, but that's something that we're really we're losing a lot of, again, because we're wearing shoes, so we're not getting that external stimulus. It's being blocked. So do you think that's a direct impact of those two characteristics being kind of lost or wearing away over time?
Absolutely, because if you don't stimulate the skin on the foot, or you don't bring the information in, then you don't get the contraction of the local muscles in the feet. And that's really what's driving the local muscles in the core, or the deep foot activates the deep core, where there's a lot of research studies that show that chronic use of, thick supportive shoes atrophies the intrinsic muscles of the foot, or using, chronic use of orthotics deactivates the intrinsic muscles of the foot. You're essentially creating that disconnect between the foot to core sequencing.
Right. So to build on this, you also mentioned Yanda's short foot. And so I guess the first thing is to start with on that is what is it and what is it not? Because there are some common misunderstandings or misconceptions about short foot.
Yeah, so Yanda short foot, the way that I teach it and the way that I look at it is probably very similar to the way that he did, but it's evolved from how he had applied it. A lot of people will think of short foot as a way to strengthen the intrinsic muscles in the foot, but it's often referred to in a very disconnected way, where it's like, like doing toe crunches, like towel crunches with your feet.
Sure.
So you're just thinking or here's a good example, to improve like grip strength, and you squeeze a ball, or that like spring thing.
Yeah.
I'm starting dating like a 1980s kind of
Captain's
thing. Like you're a boxer, right? Yeah, you get it. Okay. So that's like not the way that you strengthen grip strength. You know what I mean? Like grip strength comes from your shoulder. Just like, okay, if you're going to make your foot strong, doing a bunch of towel crunches does not mean that your foot is strong, because that's a completely isolated exercise. We need to be integrated. So oftentimes people will kind of discredit short foot, saying that, we don't do it anymore because it doesn't, it's not an integrated exercise, which it is. The way that I teach short foot is that every time you stand on your feet and you connect your toes into the ground, so you kind of drive the tips of your toes down into the ground, as you do that flexion of your toes, you have to lift your pelvic floor, because that's really where it's used. And then you technically want to be exhaling. So the coordination of short foot is toes go down, pelvic floor goes up, and you exhale. But it's all happening at the same time.
Right.
That's the way that you should be using short foot. So I use it as a way to activate the foot to core stability that's needed during dynamic movement. So you're either doing 5 minutes of foot to core activation before you go running, or this is with the rowers, do 5 minutes of short foot to core activation with the rowers, or first thing in the morning. So it's a very powerful activation technique if it's done the right way. And I have many videos on this on the EBFA YouTube channel that people can check out, youtube.com/EBFA Fitness. And I speak about it in an integrated way.
And I'll make sure to include some of those in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great explanation. Yeah, that's just so important because, again, we want to take advantage of the foot being in contact with the environment and working that communication all the way from the ground level all the way up through the body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we went through all of our topics. Did you want to touch on any upcoming seminars or talk more about the Nabosu product or the mat?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have workshops that are all over the world. And under EBFA, we have different master instructors. So some of the workshops are taught by myself and some of the workshops are taught by our master instructors. But the workshops can be found on our website, which is ebfafitness.com. And I'm sure you'll include that on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And then we have this September in New York City, we're doing a Barefoot Training Summit. We do one every year. We actually do a couple every year. And this is our third year doing the Barefoot Training Summit. It's a 2.5-day conference where the theme of it is all around body weight, functional movement, barefoot science. This year we're focusing on breathing, pelvic floor. Stroops is coming out and doing some stuff, stick mobility. I'm actually doing a cadaver lab on the Friday before. So if some people really want to see the anatomy and cadaver of the lower extremity, we're going to be doing that. So that's barefootstrongsummit.com. And then our Nabosu barefoot training mat is super cool. Not in a biased way, but just kidding. But it's totally biased. It's a small nerve proprioceptive material that is patent pending, and it is applied onto this mat that is designed to stimulate the skin on your feet more effectively than almost every other surface. And why I developed it is that a lot of professionals, clients, athletes would be doing their barefoot training, but they'd be on these surfaces that would be doing absolutely nothing for the foot, or they would actually be blocking the proprioceptors on the feet. So let's say you're doing barefoot stimulation and you're on carpet. Let's say you're in your living room and you have like soft carpet. You might as well be in your sneakers because you're not getting any of the information, which is unfortunate because you're going out of your way to get into or take your shoes off and be barefoot, but you're not getting any stimulation.
Right.
A lot of yoga mats, people don't realize, actually block the proprioceptors in your feet,
Really?
Which means and there's research that shows that it's throwing off your postural control, where you actually need postural control during yoga because a lot of it is balance exercises and things like that.
Oh wow! So the mat material could be affecting your ability to execute the different asanas. Wow.
Yeah, so people don't even realize that. So real quick, the mat and then the insoles that we have coming out has a texture that's based on research, and the hardness of the mat and the insoles is also based on research, where harder surfaces stimulate your nervous system better, and then certain textures stimulate your nervous system better. Skin stretch is another one, so you would get that from the mat and the insoles. Mm-hmm. And then they transmit vibration. So if you jump and land, it'll actually transmit vibration, which comes into your nervous system. So we use the mat to make your nervous system sharper, in a sense. It's called tuning. So it's used to tune your feet into the noise being the stimulation of the mat.
That's excellent. Awesome.
Very cool. So I would love to have the insoles with the rowers and see, because they would actually be feeling the texture and they would be getting a constant stimulation from their feet. So if they're rowing, or as they're rowing and they're thinking hip, arms, right? There's like a whole coordination that's going on. They're trying to time with the other rowers. Is the insole would force them to be thinking about their foot. because of the noise that it gives you.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
So
Yeah, almost like it demands them to pay attention to what's happening at their feet.
yeah, it forces you to stay tuned in with your feet.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'll be sure to include that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Very cool. All right. So before, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
That would be the biggest stuff.
Okay. So before I let you off the hook completely, I gotta put you through the rapid fire.
Oh, you didn't tell me about this.
Yeah. Oh, this is fun. This is fun.
Oh,
stuff.
Okay. My favorite food.
This is just for, I ask all the guests these questions. So this is just for myself and the audience to get to know you a little bit more.
Okay. I'm excited.
Okay. So Dr. E, first question. So given all your knowledge and your current experience, if you could go back 10 years, what advice would you give yourself?
10 years. So I was, I won't tell my age out loud, but I was, I would say keep believing in what you know, like what you believe is in your gut that you think is the right way to be looking at something.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really around when I started to challenge the way that I was learning podiatry. And I would get a lot of slack and feel guilt about that. And like stay true to yourself when you know.
Trust your instincts and follow your intuition. Love it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite strength training exercise?
Anything body weight. So I'm doing aerial straps now. So I got to be hanging on something.
Oh, very cool. Awesome.
Yeah. It's pretty badass.
Nice. Do you have a favorite training session? Like something like a routine or something you're working on?
Yeah. So my favorite now is single arm inversions. So
wow.
Yeah, trying to get much more single arm strength, hanging strength.
Wow. Impressive. How has your training changed today compared to 10 years ago?
Oh man, 10 years ago, I was like thick. I was lifting really heavy.
Really?
I destroyed my joints lifting heavy. Oh man.
Oh no.
Yeah. I actually did some fitness, bodybuilding competition stuff.
Okay.
So clearly I was on a whole other like hypertrophy type training, it's awesome to like lift that weight and just, push your body in that way. But then it started hurting my joints too much. And I'm telling you, since I was a gymnast for 13 years, started doing the heavy training, killed my joints. Now all I've been doing in the past 3 years for sure has only been body weight, aerialist, gymnastics type stuff. And I've never felt better.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. We kind of just touched on that. Have you ever is there a specific injury you've had? And if so, how did that affect your training?
Oh my God. I had totally like call myself out on this one. I had what's called athletic pubalgia.
Okay. Which
is sports hernia. And I got it cycling. So I'm very in tune with cycling injuries because my hip completely destabilized, had to have surgery, and then really developed a lot of the rehab stuff in our education based on the ineffectiveness of every other rehab modality out there after my surgery. So
wow, you
learn a lot from yourself and your own injuries.
Yeah, I'll say that's incredible. What is one thing that high school athletes or junior athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
I would say something mindful. Okay. Meditate, yoga.
Yes.
Something Zen, visualization. Yeah. I'd definitely say that.
Excellent. What's your best tip to improve recovery post-training session?
My best tip? Mm-hmm. Give a 48-hour in between when you have a new stimulus. Okay. and allow that short inflammatory response to drop down.
Excellent. 3 more.
Okay.
What's your favorite meal?
Jeez. All I'm thinking about is candy right now because
That's okay.
it's nighttime. It's Easter, so I love Peeps.
Yeah.
So right now, all I'm doing is thinking about Peeps.
Nice. Okay, we'll go with Peeps.
Okay.
What's one book everyone should read? It could be from any genre. It doesn't have to be health or fitness related.
Yeah, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Excellent. Final question. Who have you studied or do you continue to study in your career to improve and get better?
I would say the research of Dr. Benonnig, Nigg, or I have to have 2, Robert Schleip.
Okay. Awesome.
With his spatial fitness.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Dr. Emily, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. This takes us through to the end of the show.
No, this is wonderful. I had so much fun.
Yeah, me too. So just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye off air, and we'll wrap this one up.
Sounds great.
I hope you enjoyed this brand new episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you valued this content, please take a moment, head on over to iTunes and drop in a 5-star review. Or share it on your favorite social media networks such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And be sure to tune in next week when I have another brand new episode when I sit down with Joe Daniels, founder of Swing This Kettlebell.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.